In 1989, the Heritage Foundation had put out this policy paper. It was called Assuring Affordable Health Care for All Americans. And that paper back in 1989 proposed a new idea for health reform: the individual mandate, the requirement that all households purchase private insurance. With that, the Heritage Foundation had staked out the conservative pole on the issue of health care. And then in 2006, the basic Heritage Healthcare Framework was actually established as law in a major state by a Republican governor who was then going to go out and run for president. But of course, Romney didn't win in 2008. Barack Obama did. And one of his first orders of business was health reform. And his model was, I think you know this by now, the plan that was working in Massachusetts, the Romney plan, the Heritage Foundation plan. But in the political climate of the Obama era, those subtleties may have been lost on the right. They were lost on the right. They have wanted an all-out war on the Democratic president and any policy ideas he advances, which means that for a conservative movement that had helped lay the foundation for the Affordable Care Act, it has been now nearly 4 years of all-out war on Obamacare. When Congress was debating health care in 2009, Republican Senator Jim DeMint predicted it would be Obama's Waterloo. "We are going to break him on this," he said. The right hasn't stopped trying to do that ever since. It's a quest that DeMint has continued at the Heritage Foundation, which has been running since he quit his Senate job last year. The Heritage Foundation that DeMint took over was, and is, very different than the one that produced that healthcare policy paper all those years ago. It's one where the think tank wing has taken a backseat to the political action wing, something called Heritage Action. And it's Heritage Action, with its legislative scorecards now serving as measurements of conservative purity, that set a radical goal this year: the end of Obamacare through the shutting down of the federal government and the threat of a debt ceiling default. And it was the threat of landing on the wrong side of Heritage and of getting a bad number on that scorecard that kept all those Republicans in line for so long this fall, as the government closed down, as their poll numbers dropped, as they asked themselves, wait, why are we doing this all again? 24 years before the shutdown, it was the Heritage Foundation that conceived of a conservative, market-friendly alternative to the Canadian-style healthcare, a concept that is now etched into law under the name Obamacare. In that way, the revolt the Heritage Foundation led this fall was actually a revolt against itself. A generation after that 1989 healthcare paper, a group that had been the preeminent source of conservative policy ideas has become less a shot in the arm for the right and more a shot in the foot. And this week, the New Republic is out with a piece that gives insight into the organization's decline, quoting one Republican staffer bitterly noting that, quote, "if Nancy Pelosi could write an anonymous check to Heritage Action, she would." Joining us now is the author of that story about the Heritage Foundation. She is Julia Yaffe. She's a senior editor at the New Republic. And Julia, we appreciate you being here tonight. So the story of Heritage is interesting, obviously, because in my mind, they went from coming up with the idea for the Affordable Care Act, essentially, to shutting down the government over its enactment and implementation. When a lot of people think of that story, they think of Jim DeMint, the South Carolina senator who now runs Heritage. But your story says it's this duo. It's these two guys who are a lot younger than Jim DeMint, who have taken this and turned it away from being a think tank and into just a pure sort of partisan warfare machine. Tell us who they are and how they've done this.
Sure. So my piece actually focuses on one guy, Michael Needham. He's 31. He's the CEO of Heritage Action. I think that title, CEO, is significant. He has a lieutenant, Tim Chapman, who's the COO. And they were helped to be put in place by the chairman of the Heritage Foundation board, a guy named Saunders, who was a Wall Street banker in the 80s. He pushed, when he was elected to the board in 2009, he pushed for a more aggressive approach, for Heritage to take a more aggressive approach on the Hill and to create a lobbying arm. By this point, Michael Needham was already had served as chief of staff to Heritage Foundation's creator and president, Edwin Foldner. He had gone off to work for the Giuliani campaign. He went, like his father, to Stanford Business School. He has a very sterling pedigree. He's from the Upper East Side. He went to Collegiate and Williams. And he was also a proponent of this. He was then brought back to run this lobbying arm in 2010 when it was created. And because a lot of the organizational details were left vague, how the money would be spent, where it would come from, who would call the shots, he and Tim Chapman basically called the shots because there was nobody else calling it for them. And then by the time the Heritage Elders woke up, they had radically changed the Heritage brand. They had alienated a lot of people on the Hill with their aggressive, sharp-elbowed tactics. And the elders at Heritage Foundation kind of woke up one day and realized that the organization had radically changed.
So, right, that's what your piece really brings out, is this tension between the elders, as you call them, and this sort of new guard. What's interesting to me is I think this sort of illustrates a challenge that more broadly faces the right now, because when you look at Heritage, you could say politically, obviously, the shutdown was a disaster for the conservative movement and the Republican Party, and traditionally the role of Heritage as this sort of source of policy ideas for the conservative movement, that might be changing. But at the same time, leading this charge to defund Obamacare has meant a windfall in terms of grassroots donations for Heritage and for other groups like it. How do the people at Heritage sort of reconcile those two things, that with the grassroots, they can now turn and make an appeal and bring in big money, even if they're not doing what they used to do?
Well, I think the jury's still out on that. And if you talk to people at Heritage or people who were pretty senior there who have recently left, they would tell you the same thing. Heritage Foundation, is a very old, well-respected brand on the right. It has an $82 million annual budget, so every year they burn through $82 million, and they have, plenty left for the next year and the year after that. Heritage Action has raised $5 million last year. Their biggest donation was from the Koch brothers for $500,000. Everything else comes, from smaller grassroots donations. And we have yet to see how what they did with the shutdown and bringing the U.S. to the brink of default with nothing to show for it, how that will affect the bigger donors, because a lot of people on the right and a lot of business groups are really angry at them. And as the Heritage Elders are happy to point out, you can't run an $82 million organization on $25 donations.
Yeah, no, and I think that is one of the interesting things to watch on the right now, is that tension between the big money, more sort of corporate donor class, and the grassroots side that wants more of this sort of all-out partisan warfare. Anyway, Julia Ioffe is senior editor at The New Republic. It's a great story. I encourage you to read if you hadn't, and I thank you for joining us tonight.